Okay, now let's make this just a little bit fancier. What I'm going to do is modify the spawner so that it can create an they'll create objects randomly, or I could give it like, create one of these three objects. And what I'm going to do here is make some more prefabs. So maybe in my scene, I'll make a sphere, and I'll do the same thing. I'll put a rigid body component on it, and I'll call it sphere prefab. Up here in the top right, I'll change its name. And then let me put a material on it here. So let's expand the, oh, there it is. It's under the mesh renderer section. There's the default material. Let me go into my materials folder, and let me make the sphere yellow. And I think that's all we need. And then what I'm going to do is I'll go to my prefabs folder, and I'm going to drag this thing down here into my prefabs folder. And now that I've got this thing as a prefab, I can delete it out of my scene. And then let me do the same thing. I'll make something else. I will make a 3D object. Let's make a capsule. And I'll do the same thing. I'll put the rigid body component on it to make it part of the physics engine. And I'll go into my materials folder, and I'll drag, I haven't made anything red yet, right? So let me put a red material on the capsule. And then go into my prefabs folder, and I'll drag the capsule down here, and then I'll delete the capsule out of my scene. So I hope you're seeing that by putting things in folders, it makes your project much easier to manage. Now imagine, we've got a real project with hundreds of things. If we just throw it all in this top level folder, forget it. We're never going to find anything. It's going to be a big mess. So now that I've got all these things, how do I kind of modify the spawner to be able to create those things? And what we need to do there is, instead of having one variable to spawn, we need an array of variables to spawn. So let's make this thing an array. So instead of having one game object, let's make an array of game objects. So that's what the square brackets do. They say make me an array of game objects. And when I do that, I actually have to say how many slots I want to allocate. So I have to say equals new game object, and then I have to say in square brackets how many game objects I want. And let's just say I want 3 of them. So what I've done now is I've created, instead of having one variable called things to spawn, I've created a group of 3 variables called thing to spawn. Let me change it to things to spawn in uppercase letters here. Or sorry, let me just add an S there so it's plural. And now let's go, that's going to break our code here. I'm going to comment out this line for 2 seconds, and let's just go back to the inspector here and see how our code changes now. It's going to take a second to refresh, but instead of thing to spawn, see, it just changed there. Now watch this, things to spawn. Notice I've got an array of 3 slots. Like, that's what an array is. Like, you can really see the slots there. That's what I love about Unity and arrays. I made an array of 3 things, and look, I've got 3 slots there. And now what I can do is I can take my prefabs, and let me drag them into the different slots. There we go. So now the spawner has a reference to not one thing, but 3 things. And now all I have to do is go back to my script. So here's the line that's got to change. Thing to spawn doesn't exist anymore. So we have to somehow pick one at random. So let's look at how Unity generates random numbers. It's actually built right into the language. I think you can just say random.range, I believe. There we go. And we can ask it for a number between 0 and 3. So let's call this our index. So let's make a number between 0, 1 to 3, and we're going to store it in an index, which is like it's the number of the slot we want. And then let's say things to spawn, square brackets, index. So what this does is it generates the slot number to go into, and then we say go into that slot. So if this comes up 0, we get whatever is in slot 0. If this comes up 1, we get whatever is in slot 1. If this comes up 2, we get whatever is in slot 2. Now let's run it and see how that works. I just think that's really cool that when you make an array, you can see the slots right there. I mean, it really drives home what an array is. It's like it's a list. It's a fixed sized list of things. Now let's run it. And now you can see it is spawning out stuff like crazy. Whee! There we go. Lots of fun. So there you go. Now that would be useful is like, okay, you've got a spawner that, you know, like Quake or something, you know, the arena, you run around, you know that like in the corner things spawn, but you never know what it's going to be. Is it going to be a health pack? Is it going to be ammo? Is it going to be invisibility or invincibility or something? This is an example of how you could do something like that. You make an object called spawner, and then you give it an array of things that it can spawn, and then when it runs, it randomly picks when to respawn. And also, this interval here, we could have generated that to be a random number too. We could say, you know, create me a new something, and then wait like 15 to 20 minutes before spawning it again, or something like that. Or, you know, we don't have to have a fixed interval. We could change the interval. We could randomize it. So there you go. That's now that's, I'd say that's a significant improvement over our last iteration of this project.